A few years ago, I worked this construction job on a lake house. The other guys on my crew were Tony and Mark. We were renovating the deck and dock and adding light fixtures. The owner was a man in his 40s who I'll call Rob, and I got weird vibes from him. He didn't say much and would sometimes just walk around inspecting our work, not saying anything. He was always home when we arrived in the mornings, but would leave after a few hours and would never come back. I didn't particularly care though, as long as he didn't complain about our work I was happy. The lake house sat on the edge of a deep, murky lake surrounded by dense trees that blocked out most of the sunlight. It was a quiet job, peaceful even, until one day. About halfway through the project, something odd happened. Tony was down by the dock replacing some rotted boards when he called us over. "Hey, check this out," he said, holding up a rusted locket he dug out of the mud near the water's edge. It was old, caked with grime, but when he pried it open, there was a faded photo of a woman inside, her face blurry, her eyes staring blankly. We laughed it off, joking about buried treasure, until Rob appeared out of nowhere. His face went pale, like he'd seen a ghost. He snatched the locket from Tony's hand and muttered, "I'll take care of this." Then he walked off without another word. We shrugged it off, but I couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. A couple days later, Mark had his own strange moment. He was wiring up one of the new light fixtures near the water when he froze. "Guys, I swear I just saw something," he said, pointing at the lake. "There's something big, something moving under the surface." We rushed over, but the water was still, reflecting the gray sky above. "Probably just a fish," I said, trying to sound convincing, but Mark shook his head. "No man, it was bigger than that, like a shadow that didn't belong." We ribbed him about it, but when I glanced up at the house, I saw Rob standing at the window, watching us. His face was blank and unreadable, and it sent a chill through me. Then there was the stuff in Rob's study. One day, I had to go inside to grab some paperwork, and I couldn't help but notice the setup he had in there. There were multiple monitors, computers, and what looked like control panels, all humming quietly. It seemed over the top for a guy who supposedly just owned a lake house. I figured he was some tech geek or maybe worked remotely, but it stuck with me. Something about this guy wasn't adding up. The real trouble came on our last day. We'd been working late to finish the job, installing the final lighting fixture on the dock. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the lake cloaked in twilight. We were packing up our tools, ready to call it a wrap, when it happened. Every single light, the ones in the house and the new fixtures we just wired, went out all at once. It was like someone had hit a master switch, plunging us into total darkness. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the soft lapping of the lake against the dock. We stood there, fumbling with our gear, trying to figure out what went wrong. "Power surge, maybe?" Tony suggested, but before I could respond, we heard it. It was a loud splash, like something heavy had hit the water. It wasn't the usual sound of a fish jumping either. This was deliberate and close. "What the hell was that?" Tony whispered, his voice tight. Mark grabbed his flashlight from his belt and flicked it on, sweeping the beam across the lake. For a split second, the light caught something, a massive, dark shape breaking the surface. It was hulking, with what looked like long, sinewy arms stretching toward the dock. My breath caught in my throat as it lingered there, just long enough for us to register it before slipping back under the water, leaving ripples spreading out in its wake. "What the hell was that?" Mark yelled, stumbling back. "I don't know, but we're not sticking around," I said. I grabbed my tool bag, my heart hammering as more splashes echoed behind us. They were closer now, like whatever it was had moved right up to the edge of the dock. We bolted for the truck, our boots pounding against the wooden planks. I risked a glance back as we ran, the house lights flickering back on, casting a sickly glow over the water. I thought I saw something, a disturbance, a shadow shifting beneath the surface, but we didn't stop to find out. We piled into the truck, and I floored it out of there, tires kicking up gravel as we sped down the winding road. None of us spoke until we were miles away, back at the shop and safe under the harsh fluorescent lights. Tony tried to play it cool, saying it was probably just a big fish, right? Or a deer swimming or something? But Mark wasn't buying it, and neither was I. What we saw didn't move like any animal I'd ever known, and it felt wrong. That night, I couldn't stop replaying it in my head either. The blackout, the timing, that thing in the water, it was too much to be a coincidence. And then there was Rob. He wasn't there when it happened, but I kept thinking about how he acted with the locket and how he watched us after Mark's sighting. I also remembered that weird tech stuff in his study. What if he'd set it up somehow? What if he'd been watching us the whole time? I'm still not sure what that thing we saw in the water was, but I can't help but think Rob was involved. I mean, how else would the lights have gone out right when we finished? Even though Rob wasn't there and we never saw any cameras, I guess it's possible he positioned one to look through the window and he was controlling the lighting in that thing remotely. Still, I have no idea why he'd go to such lengths to do that. He even paid for the work earlier that day, so it's not like he would scare us off and our business wouldn't get paid. In the end, I'm just glad that whatever was in the water wouldn't or couldn't do us harm. My senior year in college, I went with 3 of my friends to Miami for spring break. I'll call them Sarah, Melissa, and Stephanie for the purposes of the story. We were renting a guest house for a few nights, and we were all 21, so of course alcohol would be involved. The guest house sat on the edge of a quiet neighborhood, its faded paint and creaky wooden porch giving it a slightly weathered charm. By day, it was a cozy retreat from the chaos of Miami's beaches and bars, but at night, the surrounding stillness felt almost oppressive. It was broken only by the rustle of palm trees in the breeze. We didn't let it bother us, though. We were too busy soaking up the freedom of spring break. The first couple of nights were everything we'd hoped for. We lounged by the ocean, flirted with strangers at beachside bars, and danced until our feet ached. Alcohol flowed freely, and I was loving every minute of it. But on the 4th night, I took things too far. We'd ended up at this packed club, the kind where the bass vibrates through your chest and the air feels sticky with humidity. I was in a reckless mood, tossing back drinks faster than I could count. Melissa tried to rein me in at one point, grabbing my arm as I reached for another shot. "Jess, you're gonna regret this tomorrow," she warned, her voice tinged with worry. I just laughed her off. "It's spring break, live a little." I said that while downing the shot and feeling the burn slide down my throat. By the time the club's lights started blurring into streaks, I knew I'd overdone it. My stomach churned and a dizzy haze settled over me. "I need to sit down," I mumbled to Sarah, who was nearby, but my words barely made sense. She guided me to a corner booth, but the noise and heat were overwhelming. "I'm going back to the guest house," I told her, pushing myself up. "Wait, we'll all go," she said, but I waved her off. "It's fine, I just need to sleep it off. I'll text you when I'm there," I insisted, stumbling toward the exit before she could argue. The walk back was a disaster. The cool night air hit me like a slap, but it didn't clear my head. It just made the world tilt harder. The streets were a maze of flickering lights and looming shadows, and I couldn't tell if I was going the right way. My phone felt heavy in my hand, too much effort to unlock. Then I heard it, a low, rhythmic tapping, like someone walking just out of sight. I turned, squinting into the darkness, but saw nothing. My pulse quickened. Was someone there? I tried my best to keep moving, faster now, though my legs felt like they were sinking into mud. The tapping grew louder and closer, until it was all I could focus on. I spun around again, still nothing but empty streets and swaying trees. Fear clawed at me, sharper than the nausea. I had to get back. But before I could take another step, my vision swam and the ground rushed up to meet me. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't on the street. I was lying on a lumpy couch in a dim, unfamiliar room. The air smelled faintly of mildew, and a single lamp cast long, jagged shadows across the walls. My head throbbed, and my mouth was dry as sandpaper. Where was I? Panic surged through me as I sat up, my hands trembling. My phone was gone, and so was my purse. Then I heard a creak from somewhere deeper in the house, and my breath caught. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, approached from a hallway I couldn't see. My mind raced with every worst-case scenario. I'd been taken, locked away, and no one knew where I was. I scrambled to my feet, looking for anything to defend myself with, when a figure stepped into the light. It was an older woman, her gray hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing a faded bathrobe. She froze when she saw me staring, then raised her hands. "Whoa, easy there," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You're safe. I found you passed out on my porch about an hour ago." I blinked, trying to process her words. "Your porch?" She nodded, pointing toward a window where I could see the faint outline of the guest house across the street. "You were sprawled out there, muttering nonsense. I didn't want to leave you outside, too many weirdos around here at night, so I dragged you in. Your friend should be here soon. I called the number on your phone's lock screen." Relief flooded me, but it was tinged with shame. I'd been so drunk I'd collapsed on a stranger's doorstep, and she'd had to haul me inside like some stray animal. As if on cue, I heard the familiar sound of Sarah's voice outside, followed by a knock. The woman let my friends in, and they rushed over, their faces a mix of worry and exasperation. "Jess, what the hell?" Stephanie said, hugging me tightly. "We've been freaking out." "I'm sorry," I mumbled, my voice cracking. "I don't even remember getting here." The woman handed me my phone and purse, which she'd kept safe on a side table. "You're lucky I'm the one who found you," she said, her tone stern. "Next time, you might not be." Her words stuck with me long after we thanked her and stumbled back to the guest house. I couldn't shake the fear I'd felt waking up in that strange room, or the realization of how helpless I'd been. Those tapping footsteps I'd heard, maybe they were just the wind, or maybe they were real. I'd never know, and that uncertainty was terrifying enough. From that night on, I swore I'd never drink myself into oblivion again. Spring break was supposed to be fun, not a brush with disaster. I learned my lesson the hard way. Losing control isn't worth the risk of losing everything. I was in 8th grade when my parents dragged me to a church picnic in a small town I'd never heard of before. They kept going on about how it would be a nice family outing, but the moment we pulled into that dusty parking lot, I knew it was going to be a snooze fest. For starters, the place looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s, with faded wooden signs, a rickety old church, and a bunch of townsfolk milling around with plastered-on smiles. I slouched out of the car, already counting the minutes until we could leave. But then, I saw her. Right near the entrance to the picnic grounds, there was this girl about my age, beautiful, with long brown hair and these striking green eyes that seemed to catch the sunlight just right. She stood out like a beacon in that sea of drabness. For a split second, she looked my way, and I swear I felt something, like a jolt. I wanted to say hi, maybe even ask her name, but before I could muster up the courage, she turned and vanished into the crowd. And just like that, she was gone. I sighed, figuring that was the most excitement I'd get all day. With nothing else to do, I started wandering around the picnic, hoping to spot her again. Outside, they had some games set up, ring toss, a beanbag throw, and this weird fishing game where you used a pole to hook plastic fish from a kiddie pool. At first it seemed standard, but the more I looked, the more things felt off. The prizes hanging from the booths weren't your typical stuffed animals or cheap toys. There was a faded ragdoll with stitches crisscrossing its face, a wooden horse with chipped paint and one eye gouged out, and a cracked porcelain clown that gave me the creeps just looking at it. The guy running the ring toss handed me 3 rings and said, "Give it a shot, kid. You might win something you'll never forget." His voice was friendly enough, but his smile didn't match his eyes. They were too wide and too intense. I tossed the rings and missed every time, and he just chuckled. "Maybe next time," he said, but it sounded hollow, like he didn't mean it. Feeling a little weirded out, I headed inside the church hall to check out the plant and cake walks. The plant walk was this odd setup where people stepped in a circle to music, stopping at numbered spots to win a potted plant. But these plants weren't normal. Some had leaves that curled inward like claws, and others had these tiny blood-red flowers that seemed to pulse faintly. One pot had a vine that I could have sworn moved when I passed by, like it was reaching for me. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the hairs on my neck were standing up. The cakewalk was next, and it wasn't much better. The cakes were lined up on a table, each one decorated with swirls of icing. But instead of happy designs, they had words written on them, "For Daniel, in memory of Sarah, rest easy, Michael." It was like they were baked for a funeral, not a picnic. I asked a lady nearby what the names meant, and she just smiled and said, "Oh, they're for special guests." I guess her tone was sweet, but it still sent a chill down my spine. By then, I'd had enough of the creepy vibes. I decided to try the bingo hall. Maybe I could win something normal and call it a day. The hall was a big, shadowy room with long tables and a crowd of people hunched over their cards. I grabbed one from the stack and found a seat near the back. That's when I saw her again, the girl from earlier. She was sitting a few tables away, marking her card with a small pencil. She glanced up, caught my eye, and gave me a shy smile. My heart did a little flip. "Hey," I said, sliding into the seat across from her. "I'm Jake." "Hi, Jake," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "I'm Emily." "You here with your family too?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation going. She hesitated, then nodded, something like that. But before I could ask more, the bingo caller, a tall, thin man with a voice like gravel, announced the game was starting. It was a Blackout style game, where you had to cover every square on your card to win. He began calling numbers slow and deliberate, G52, B9, O71. The room was dead quiet except for his voice and the rustle of markers on cards. I kept sneaking looks at Emily, who was focused but tense, her brow furrowed like she was waiting for something. The game stretched on forever. My card was filling up, and I noticed Emily's was too. Finally, I only needed one more number, I-23. The caller reached into the basket and pulled out a ball. He said, I-23. "Bingo!" I shouted, raising my hand. At the exact same moment, Emily called out bingo too. The room went still. Every single person turned to stare at us, their faces blank, their eyes locked on us like we'd done something wrong. The caller stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Well, well," he said, his lips curling into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "2 winners. That's rare." Before I could process what he meant, the lights flickered violently, then went out completely. The hall plunged into pitch-black darkness. I heard a low murmur ripple through the room, like a dozen voices whispering at once. My pulse started racing, and I reached out instinctively. My hand brushed Emily's, and she grabbed it and held on tight. "Don't move," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Just wait." The lights buzzed back on a few seconds later, and I blinked, trying to adjust. When my vision cleared, my stomach dropped. The hall was empty, every chair, every table, vacant. It was just me and Emily, alone in that huge silent room. The bingo cards, the markers, even the caller's basket, they were all gone. "We need to get out of here," Emily said, her voice urgent. She pulled me to my feet and dragged me towards the door. Now. "What's going on?" I stammered as we stumbled outside. The picnic grounds were deserted too. No people, no games, just an eerie silence. A thick fog had rolled in, curling around the trees like ghostly fingers. "They've been watching us," she said, her eyes darting around. "The picnic, it's not what it seems. When 2 people win the Blackout game together, it changes things." What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice cracking. She stopped and looked at me, her expression a mix of fear and determination. "This town, it's trapped. Everyone here is stuck, reliving this day over and over. I've been trying to get out for I don't even know how long. But when 2 people win at the same time, it's a chance to break free. We have to leave, Jake, right now." I didn't fully understand, but the panic in her eyes was enough. We started running, cutting through the fog toward the edge of town. That's when I heard it, a faint voice calling my name. "Jake, where are you going?" It sounded like my mom. Then another, "Come back, buddy," my dad. I slowed down, my heart twisting. "Don't listen," Emily snapped, grabbing my arm. "It's a trick. They'll say anything to keep you here." The voices grew louder and more desperate. "Jake, we need you. Don't leave us." I clenched my fists and kept moving, focusing on Emily's hand and mine. Shadows flickered in the fog, shapes that looked like people reaching out, but we didn't stop. Finally, we reached an old wooden sign that read, "Town Limits." Emily squeezed my hand. "Cross it," she said. "Don't look back." We stepped over the line together, and the air shifted, like a pressure I hadn't noticed suddenly lifted. The voices cut off mid-sentence, and the fog began to thin. I risked a glance at Emily, who was breathing hard, a relieved smile breaking across her face. "We did it," she said. "We're out." I was still reeling, but I managed to ask, "What was that place?" "A trap," she said simply. "A loop. But you helped me escape. Thank you, Jake." After that day, Emily and I stuck together. We started as friends, bonded by that insane experience, and over the years it turned into something more. We started dating in high school, and eventually we got married. We never went back to that town, and didn't even look it up on a map. But every now and then, we talk about how it all began. A boring church picnic that turned into a nightmare, and somehow led us to a happily ever after.